end it.
At the end.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this rainy and thundery evening here in the Hudson Valley. We've had some adventures before we came on the air this evening, which fortunately have been resolved. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Helen Sosłowski. I'm the events director for Oblong Books here in New York's Hudson Valley. A reminder that if you have any questions for our authors this evening, please type them into the chat or into the Q&A that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them at the end of the program. We're delighted this evening to welcome authors Carol Goodman and Sarah Stewart Taylor, who are joining us to talk about their new thrillers. Carol's thriller, The Disinvited Guest, just launched today, so we are celebrating her book launch. Congratulations, Carol.
Thank you.
And the interesting thing about both these novels is that they're set in remote coastal locations. Carol Goodman's The Disinvited Guest, which was published by William Morrow, is set on a remote island off the coast of Maine in the wake of the 2020 pandemic. And Sarah Stewart Taylor's The Drowning Sea was published by Minotaur Books on the equally remote cliffs of Western Island's Cork Peninsula. All the perfect ingredients for a first-rate thriller. Carol Goodman is the critically acclaimed author of 14 novels, including The Lake of Dead Languages and The Seduction of Water, which won the 2003 Hammett Prize. Her books have been translated into 16 languages. She lives here in the Hudson Valley and she teaches writing and literature at the New School in SUNY New Paltz. Sarah Stewart Taylor is the author of the Sweeney St series and the Maggie D'arcy series, of which The Drowning Sea is an addition. She grew up on Long Island in New York and was educated at Middlebury College in Vermont and Trinity College in Dublin. She now lives with her family on a farm in Vermont where they raise sheep and grow blueberries. The entire time I was preparing this introduction, I was praying I didn't say grow sheep and raise blueberries. So I'm glad I didn't do that.
It's all kind of the same. So
I know, it's like sheep blueberries, you know. So signed copies of The Disinvited Guest and copies of The Drowning Sea are available in our stores and online through oblongbooks.com. And I'll post the links in the chat for those of you who'd like to purchase a copy. Welcome, Carol and Sarah. Thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Helen. Thanks, Oblong Books. And Sarah, thank you for joining me on this rainy night in the Hudson Valley, remotely from Vermont.
From Vermont. Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Happy Publication Day, Carol.
It's
always really exciting. It's such a great day when the book is finally out, when you've been working on it for so long.
Yes. Yeah. And it's been fun. I sort of forget over the years that, you know, people do start tweeting at you and things happen. And then to have this event is the perfect way to spend a pub day. And congratulations, your book has been out about a month. Is that?
Yeah, I guess 3 weeks maybe at this point.
So congratulations on your new publication as well, which I read, and I think I actually say how much I like it somewhere.
Yeah, yes, I think you do. You're right there. You are right there.
There I am. Yes. So, and and I've enjoyed your work for many years, as I think I tweeted at you about a year ago, that I loved the Sweeney St. novels from a number of years ago, and then was so excited that you were doing a new series.
Well, I've been a fan of yours since your very first book, and The Lake of Dead Languages, it's one of those books that I go back to, and it's just masterful, if I can say.
Oh.
I'm a huge fan. And it's just wonderful to.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and it was fun. It's been fun to make friends with other authors, even during the pandemic. It was something that we could do, so that was very exciting. I was happy when we started conversing, and we actually saw each other in real life at Malice Domestic, and fun that we can do this together. So we're going to, other than telling each other how great we love our books, we'll tell you how much we love
do that all night.
I could do it for a very long time, and it'd be a lot of fun. And so we thought we would start out. I'm going to give a little reading from The Disinvited, The Disinvited Guest. It was originally called The Disinvited, and it does take place on the coast in Maine. And Helen said in the wake of the 2020 pandemic, but we'll see that that wake is rather longer. It's actually taking place in a while. So I'm going to go ahead and read this first chapter. We're here. Reed's voice wakes me from the fitful sleep I'd fallen into somewhere north of Portland. The slap of wipers and sluice of tires accomplishing what bourbon and sleeping pills had failed to do for the past 2 weeks. I open my eyes to a wall of sodden gray, the color of wet cement. I can feel it pressing down my throat. I cough. Reed swivels his head toward me, blue eyes feverish in the gloom above his white surgical mask. I'm fine. I reach for the water bottle and swig lukewarm water that tastes like copper. The others? Behind us. Crosby's driving like an old woman trying to protect his precious Volvo's paint job. Honestly, for a supposed socialist, he likes the trappings of the bourgeoisie. He grins, his bones sharpening under sallow skin. With all the stress of the recent news and preparations to come to the island, neither of us has been eating much for the past few weeks. They could have gotten lost, I say. Reed shakes his head. There's just the one road and it ends here. He points to something outside, a weathered gray sign, Land's End, pass at your own risk. I shiver. Reed places his hand on my forehead. It feels good to be touched. When was the last time we touched? But I shrug it away. I'm fine, I say again. Check. I take the thermometer gun out of the cup holder and aim it at my forehead, peering into the fog until an electronic voice pronounces the number 98.6. Normal, I say. Nothing is normal. Nothing has been normal for months, maybe longer. I hear tires on gravel behind us. They're here, Reed says. I want him to touch me again, but we promised we wouldn't until we were sure we were both safe. And Reed always keeps his promises. He's gotten us this far, hasn't he? Ready? I nod. It's a lie. I hadn't been ready for any of this, not when the first cases were reported, or my classes at the college went remote, or the restaurants and stores closed. None of us had, except for Reed. Somehow he'd seen it coming and had a plan set in place when most people were still pretending it wasn't real. Now he's opening the car door and stepping out into the fog, moving forward as if the path is clear. I follow him into the mist toward a car that looks unfamiliar. My heart rate speeds up and my skin turns clammy. Reed had warned that the locals might not like us coming up here, carrying our contagion from the big cities. A woman at a rest stop outside of Portland had pressed her unmasked face against the passenger side window and hissed, "Go back where you came from." Who knows what crazed vigilantes may be in the grimy car. Then I recognize Crosby's beige Volvo beneath the mud splatter and Ada getting out of the car. Her curly red hair looks like it has exploded into a corona around her masked face, like the virus itself has surrounded her with its pestilent nimbus. The spark in her eyes, though, brings me back to the 18-year-old who greeted me at the door of our freshman dorm with a red Solo cup of watery beer. Now she's holding up a thermometer gun. 98.6, bitches, she crows. The only thing normal about me. We have to take them together, Reed says. Hello to you too, Crosby says, his loafers sinking into the mud as he gets out of the car. He's wearing a plexiglass space shield designed, it appears, to show off his meticulously trimmed goatee. We just thought we'd check before we got out of the car, he says, as a courtesy. He holds up his wrist to display a temperature reading on his smartwatch. I notice it's the latest model. Reed is right. For a socialist, Crosby likes his toys. We took ours too, I say, jumping in before Reed can respond. It isn't strictly true. Only I have taken my temperature. No fevers here. Were Nico and Liz far behind you? I ask, peering toward the road we drove in on. There's nothing to see, though, as if the fog has already swallowed the world we've come from. We waited at the turnoff until we saw them, Crosby says, glancing at Reed, as if Reed hadn't done the same for him. But then we lost them a little ways back. I was too busy trying not to drive into the ocean. He gestures at the water, which I now see is on 3 sides of us. We're on a muddy spit of land that dribbles out into the ocean as if it just got tired and gave up. Aside from the weathered gray dock with its ominous sign, the only other structure is a long gray shed with a tin roof, the exact color of the fog. Maybe Nico stopped to take a photograph, Ada says. In this pea soup, Reed asks. Ada shrugs. Have you seen Nico's work? Fog is like her métier. She pronounces the French word with an exaggerated accent, the way she would at school when she was making fun of someone she thought was pretentious. And she's hit the jackpot here, Crosby says, walking toward the pier with his hands in his pockets. Is it always like this? It's Maine, Reed replies matter-of-factly, going to stand a careful 6 feet away from him. My father always said it was good luck to arrive on the island in fog. And for us it is. No one will see us heading out there. Is there anyone around to see us? Crosby asks. A few houses, guest cottages in the summer, a couple of lobstermen who live on this road. He jerks his chin at the shed. We can store our cars in the boathouse so no one sees them. He looks back toward the road. I just hope Nico and Liz didn't run into anyone. They know not to get out of the car, I say. They wouldn't take any chances. But if Nico did get out of the car to take a picture, Reed says, and someone did approach them. We don't know that's happening, I say, trying to forestall the train of Reed's projections. Once he gets going, predicting each cause and effect, it's hard to derail him. His mind is like a Rube Goldberg machine. Once the marble is rolling, it's going to trip every hazard and spring every mousetrap. We don't know if she even got out of the car, I say. Then where are they, Reed asks, in the calm voice he adopts when he thinks I'm not facing the hard facts, or at least the facts as he sees them. There, Crosby says. At the same moment, we hear the car tires on gravel. But it's not Nico and Liz's yellow Mini. It's a rusted orange pickup truck. A big man in a yellow rain slicker, baseball cap, and red bandana tied over his mouth and nose steps out of the truck. Reed breaks into a grin and heads toward the man as if he's going to wrap him in a bear hug. I've never seen Reed look so happy to see anyone, myself included. He halts a mere 3 feet away. Mac, man, you're here. Mac tugs the bandana away from his face, revealing a sunburnt nose and grins. Hey, man, I'm the one who lives here. Where else would I be? I see you made it. As if we've arrived for a kegger. Still, I'm relieved. This is Mac, Reed's best friend from high school and the one who's been setting everything up on the island. Yeah, we did, or at least most of us. I'm getting concerned about Liz. No worries, man. I winched her and her girlfriend out of a ditch a couple miles back. He cocks a thumb over his shoulder and the yellow Mini appears as if summoned. It's now a mottled yellow-brown, as if someone had stamped a sunflower into the mud. A pestilent color. But then everything looks pestilent these days. When Nico gets out, she's covered head to toe in the same muck. Even her black spiky hair, cut so choppily I would think it was a lockdown DIY job, only it's the way Nico's hair always looks, is covered in mud. She's not wearing a mask. I hear Reed swear under his breath. Virus isn't transmitted through mud, I say softly. Nico grins, her teeth eerily white against her mud-streaked face. I was thinking a good coating of it might keep the virus out, she says. Shut up, Liz says, getting out of the car. She is mud-free, immaculate in soft drapey yoga pants, white cotton tunic, and a linen mask fitted to her face in a complicated pattern of origami folds. Her long blonde hair gleams as if she's been brushing it all the way up from Boston. It's hard to understand how she could emerge from the same car so spotless. Nico was trying to push our car out of a ditch. If you idiots hadn't sped away without us, she glares at her brother, Reed, even though ours hadn't been the car directly ahead of hers. You'd have seen us and been able to help. Thank God Mac came along. Mac shrugs. I just took one last beer run, but yeah, it was no problem, Lizzie. A beer run? Crosby repeats. Aren't you supposed to be self-isolating? Beer doesn't carry the virus, Mac replies. I picked up a pallet down at Hanny's Market, untouched by human hands since delivery. Mac's voice is calm and matter of fact, but he straightens himself up as if to remind us of how tall he is, which must be around 6'5". His eyes, shaded by his cap, go a dead flat green, the same color as the water lapping against the wooden pilings. Reed steps between the two men. Max, following the procedure we set in place, new goods from the store stay in the supply shed for 14 days before being stocked up in the house pantries. Right, Mac? Mac visibly relaxes. Yeah, and I used my gloves while moving and washed my hands afterward. The stuff in the pantries has been there for weeks, clean as a whistle. He looks around as if daring one of us to object. I see that we've formed a circle with 6 feet between each couple, Mac in the middle of it. Okay, then, he says, if we're going to do this, we better get to it. Tide's going out. We got half an hour to pack up, or we'll be stuck sitting here with our thumbs in our asses another 8 hours. We've got to do the test first, Reed says. He opens the hatchback of our car and withdraws a Yeti cooler. Last year, we used it for camping out on the 4th of July. It held hot dogs, potato salad, and beer. Now it holds 7 testing kits. Reed holds out one for each of us, maintaining the distance of 2 outstretched arms, even with me. You'll need a surface, Max says. He grabs 3 weathered crates and lays one out for each couple. Then he gets one for himself. Okay, Reed says, opening his kit. It's pretty simple. Remove the swab and insert it into your right nostril. Why the right? Ada asks. It's just easier. Only if you're right-handed, Nico says, shoving a swab up her left nostril with her left hand, and then leaving it there, suspended in the air, like she's a kid sticking straws up her nose to imitate a walrus. Liz laughs. Even from 6 feet away, I can hear Reed stiffen. I know what he's thinking. If the swab falls in the mud, the test will be invalidated, and we only have 7. They're the new rapid tests that are supposed to be 94% accurate. I'm not sure how much he had to pay for them on the black market, but he'd come back the night before we left looking shook, and Reed never worries about money. Before he explodes, Nico extracts the moist yellowish swab. And now, she asks guileless. You stick it in this vial, cap it, and then swirl it around, Reed says, not rising to the bait. My heart swells with love and pride for him. None of them knows how hard this has been for him, how much he's had to work to keep it together for the rest of us. We all do as he says, everybody but Crosby taking off their masks. Liz makes a face at the way the swab feels in her nose. Ada makes one at how it looks coming out and says, gross, the way she would in college when we found hair in the shower drains. When we've all sealed our vials, we place them on the crates in front of us. And what happens now, Crosby asks. It takes 10 minutes, Reed replies, setting a timer on his watch. A positive turns green, a negative just stays the same. Shit, Nico says, my booger looked a little green coming out. I hope you all won't hold that against me. Before anyone can reply, Matt claps his hand together. Right, I'm not going to stand here contemplating my own snot. I'll start bringing your stuff down to the dock. You folks need to move your cars into the boathouse. He tosses a ring of keys to Reed. Let me know if my vial turns green and I'll just take a header into the drink. He grabs 3 cases of beer from the truck, balances them on his shoulder, and walks out onto the pier, vanishing into the fog. What if he is positive, Crosby asks. He's handled all the supplies for the island. He won't be, Reed says, glaring down at our 2 vials as if daring them to turn green. He's been careful, and there still aren't many cases up here. That's magical thinking, Crosby says. Have you thought about what we'll do if he's positive? Can you even drive that boat if you have to? Reed and I can both drive the boat, Liz says, but it won't be necessary. Mac would never endanger our lives. Like that's in anyone's control these days, Crosby spits out. Look, Ada says, putting her hand on Crosby's arm, we're going to know in a few minutes. No use looking into a future we can't see. As if to demonstrate the opacity of that future, she pulls an old battered purple North Face duffel from the back of their Volvo and carries it up the pier where she too vanishes into the churning mist. Give me those keys, Liz says, holding her hand out to Reed. I'll unlock the boathouse and move our car inside. Reed remains standing guard over the test vials. He's staring down at ours, or is it mine he's staring at? Is he wondering what he'll do if mine is positive? Whether he'd leave me here on the dock? His timer trills with the opening notes of Beethoven's Fifth. I look down at our tests. Both are clear. I look at the rest of the vials. They're all clear. Thank God, I say, hoping the test is as accurate as it's supposed to be. He looks at me, a question in his eyes. Who were you worried about, Lucy? Before I can answer, the pier shakes and we both turn to see what's barreling out of the fog toward us. As a dark hooded shape wielding a crooked staff emerges, I catch my breath. It looks like those cartoons of the Grim Reaper that were so popular 10 years ago during the 2020 pandemic. I remember one carrying a carton of toilet paper, another wearing a mask, but it's only Mac, the hood of his slicker up, carrying a loading hook. We better get going, he says, before the tide goes out without us. I let my breath out along with the idea that has seized me, that the death I'd avoided 10 years ago has been waiting here for me all along. So that's that.
Such a great chapter. I love it. You so efficiently give us the world and the people, and then you sort of set us off on this journey. And it's just so great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to read from The Drowning Sea, which is the third book in my Maggie D'arcy series. And just very briefly, Maggie is a Long Island homicide detective. And in the first book in the series, she's sort of pulled back into an old case that she first became acquainted with when she was a recent college graduate and her beloved cousin disappeared in Ireland. She went to Ireland, tried to solve the mystery, couldn't. Her cousin was never found. And then 23 years later, she's become a homicide detective and she returns to Ireland to try to solve the case once and for all. And then in the second book in the series, she's sort of dealing with the aftermath of, she does in fact solve her cousin's case, but I'm not going to tell you anything more about it. But she's sort of dealing with the aftermath of that, as well as a new relationship in Ireland. She's fallen in love with an Irish man. And so she's sort of trying to make it work long distance. And in The Drowning Sea, she's decided to leave her job on Long Island. And she and her daughter, Lily, have come to Ireland, to a remote peninsula in West Cork, to spend the summer with her boyfriend Connor and his son Adrian. And the idea is to kind of see if they can blend their families and see how everyone feels, and see if Maggie and Lily can move to Ireland. And so there's a lot riding on this summer, and Maggie is trying to relax, something she's not very good at. And of course, murder intervenes. And even though she's not currently working as a homicide detective, she gets sort of pulled back into the detecting game. So I thought I would read a short section from the first chapter. Maggie and Connor and their children, Lily and Adrian, are out hiking on Ross Head, which is this gorgeous peninsula, a fictional one. I invented it, though it's based on some peninsulas where I've spent time in West Cork. And they come across the Anglo-Irish Big House that's on the peninsula, that's now abandoned. And I'm going to sort of read to you and tell you what happens when they come across the house. We turn around at the end of the peninsula, stopping for a moment to look at the visual spectacle of the 5 huge modern houses perched close to the cliffs like elegant seabirds, and then start back. Lily and Adrian and Mr. Bean, their dog, dawdling behind us, checking for whales or dolphins. Ross Cliff House looms ahead of us, and as they watch the water, Connor and I walk over to the house for a closer look. It stands proudly and defiantly at the crest of the rise, a gray stone fortress with 3 stories of empty windows, an imposing columned facade, and what feels like a half-hearted attempt at decorative detail above the entrance. It's as though the architect took one look at the site and knew he'd have to trade beauty for stalwartness against winds, political and meteorological. The house seems to be crouching there, bracing itself for the gusts sweeping across the peninsula. When we walk closer, we see a couple of no trespassing signs and one reading Nevin Properties, future site of Rosscliffe House Hotel, a luxury resort and wedding venue. I think someone has tried to tame the overrun gardens all around it a bit, but otherwise it doesn't look like they've started the renovation. How old is it? I asked Connor. From the 1780s, I think I read, it's a good example of Georgian architecture, built by some ancestor of the painter Felix Crawford, next to the ruins of what had been a 13th century Norman castle. We'll have to see what else we can learn about it. It's magnificent, but ugly, I say. You know what I mean? They were meant to be imposing, these Anglo-Irish big houses. They had to be. Their builders were uneasy here, trying to cement their claim over a place they had no claim to. We stand there for a minute, looking up at the house, then walk over to a floor-length window on the terrace and look inside the large empty room on the other side of the glass. Suddenly, I feel as though I'm being watched. The wind is snapping around us, doing funny things as it rounds the stone structure. The sound it makes is almost human, like a wailing baby, and I take Connor's arm as we walk around to the back, finding a stone terrace and covered portico. One of the floor-length windows is open a little, a rock wedged in the gap. Something rustles and we both jump. Just the wind, Connor says. The terrace is covered with dead grass and leaves, and there's some trash there too, and graffiti on the back wall of the house. Well, someone's been here since the 1780s anyway, he says, pointing to a blanket in one corner and a pile of empty bottles opposite. Not a bad place for teenagers to meet for romantic assignations. I don't know, he says. I think I'd find it a bit creepy. We both take one final look at the house, and then he tucks my hand under his arm and says, let's go find the kids. We catch up to Lily and Adrian on the final stretch of the walking path, and we all stand there for a few minutes looking back at the view. It's stunning. The almost turquoise blue water against the white of the waves and the vibrant green of the grass. Across the peninsula, the 3 white cottages, ours in the center, are tucked cozily into the landscape, rather than defying it. We saw you up in the window of the mansion, Lily says suddenly. How'd you get up there? Is it open? The wind whips her dark hair all around her face. She's impossibly vibrant, her cheeks pink, her body strong and upright against the wind. What? Connor turns to look at her. What do you mean? We saw you up in one of the windows, Adrian says. Just now. What's it like up there? Connor and I look at each other confused. We were looking at the house, I say finally. We didn't go inside though. Lily pushes the hair off her face. Well, someone was up there, she says casually. Right, Adrian? We thought it was you. And I'll stop there.
Yeah. The face in the window. I see
Face
that
in the window. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love the description of that house. I'm so envious of that, that Irish scenery, and it's such an alluring place. But then I love how you get in the sort of political implications of the Anglo-Irish house, and how you make it this really impressive place, but it's also hinting at this dark history.
Yes. Well, and what I find so interesting about both of our books together is that they kind of share some of that dark history, because of course, when you think about these, when you drive around Ireland and you see these big houses everywhere, yes, some of them are very beautiful, and many of them have been renovated and are occupied or turned into hotels. But the history behind them is very dark indeed in many cases. And of course, during the Great Famine, many of the people who worked in those houses and who farmed around them died, were turned out, were sent away on ships. And so, as I was reading your book, I sort of loved how there was some connection there. And so I would love to ask you, first of all, kind of where did the idea for this book come from, and where did the idea for the Irish, I love the Irish threads, the history, the folklore, where did that come from for you?
Yeah, and so we both have this Irish connection in the book. So of course, Sarah's book is set in Ireland. So on my main island that my characters go to flee for the pandemic that's happening in the future, they discover, Lucy discovers the history of this island off the coast of Maine, and finds out that it was a quarantine island. So those ships coming with the people fleeing the potato famine in the mid-19th century, 1848, 1849. When they got to America and or Canada, they had to, many of them, by the time they got here, were the passengers had typhus. So they were sick and dying. And so they had to stop at these quarantine islands, and the many ships would be halted there. And people would die on the boats, or they'd be stuck there for a long time. So there's this history of my island where people do come and they end up staying on this island after fleeing Ireland, and what happens there on this quarantine island, it becomes this past history. So it's a very interesting connection that, my characters are fleeing from there, and you have the remains of those houses where the British landlords, the Anglo-Irish, often, I found out, I didn't know this, did you know that, because I've always heard about the potato famine, that some of the landlords actually sent their tenants on these ships.
Yeah. It was, that's part of kind of there are some sort of accepted beliefs around the famine in Ireland. And traditionally, one of them was that the English, caused the potato famine. And of course that's true. And it's also not true. It was, there was certainly negligence, certainly more, there was intent in some cases to not get food that could have saved lives to people, but it's very complicated and very murky. And the same is true around the reports of people being sent, of landowners sending all of their tenants over. It was probably, historians have told me, it was probably not as widespread as some believe, but it certainly happened. And there's evidence to prove that some of those Anglo-Irish landlords paid to send the tenants away so they wouldn't have to deal with them.
It'd be less, right? They wouldn't have to deal with them. It'd be less expensive. On the other hand, they could have thought, oh, we're giving them a chance for a better life. And the people who accepted that would, of course, be hoping. And I think we both have ancestors who came over on those ships. Yeah. So I was interested. I mean, I wanted that element as in your story, it really creates this sort of haunting feeling to know that past history. And so on this, also when our pandemic started in 2020, I, like a lot of people, became interested in past pandemics. Yeah. And started reading about, because I think, you suddenly thought about, whoa, I'm going through this. What was it like for people in the past? And so when I started thinking about that, I thought it'd be interesting to have that other layer. Yeah. When my characters end up on this island, to be thinking about what it was like to have fled one disaster and landed in another disaster.
Right. Yeah, no, I suspected that that's kind of where the kernel of inspiration for this book came from, because I know I read the book about the 1918 epidemic, and I also became very interested in how did we behave in these situations in the past.
Right.
And of course, I think what your book sort of shows up is that a lot of the inequities and a lot of the ways in which, some people have had it much harder through the pandemic than others, and the way in which people are scapegoated and all of that, that's nothing new.
No, I came across in one of the books I read, the Great Hunger, which is a book you probably have looked at too. Oh, yeah. In it, they were talking about how the certain elements of the British government just denied that there was any problem, that no, there's no potato famine, everything will be fine. And that resonated so much with those early months of the pandemic, where people would say, like, oh no, this is nothing,
right? Nobody wanted to own it. I think that's the other, when you study the famine, it's people shirking their responsibility. Nobody wanted to own it. And certainly I think there were moments where we saw that recently.
Yeah, happening too. When I started writing this, and the other inspiration I had was that I went to in 2019, I had been at a writer's retreat at a wonderful place called Norton Island, which the Eastern Frontier is the name of the organization that runs it. And it was this beautiful remote island. But it was also a little scary being in this remote place. And so I had thought when I was there, I thought, oh, I'd love to set a book, on this island. But I wasn't able to at first think of what that book would be. And then when the pandemic happened, I thought, oh, this is where, people would go. This is the kind of retreat. How were you what stage were you in writing when things locked down? And
so it's interesting actually, because I guess I had started writing the second book in the series, A Distant Grave, which is set sort of on Long Island and a little bit in Ireland. But and I had thought that the second book in the series would be this West Cork book. And I had, I had done the research, and as I started working on it, I kept having this sort of revelation that Maggie is a homicide detective and she would not just quit her job for a guy, and I essentially had her sort of after her debut, just quitting her job and moving to Ireland. And I just kept feeling like she wouldn't do that. And I had to be true to her character. And so I wrote A Distant Grave. And it's the book about the thing that happens that actually would make her quit her job.
Yeah.
So what was actually very lucky was that as I was writing that book, the pandemic hit. And of course, I couldn't travel to Ireland and do research for a couple of years. So I sort of had this research and this book idea kind of in the can that I was able to then turn to after A Distant Grave. And so it worked out really, really well.
I remember because we're Facebook friends, and I saw when you finally were able to go to Ireland, I think last summer.
Yes.
In that in a window of time where it was okay. And so it was so great to see all your pictures of Ireland, and I could tell that you were so happy to be there finally after.
It was actually in November. And
November, okay.
And it felt like when I made the plans, it felt like a safe little window. And then of course, while I was there, cases in Ireland started rising dramatically, and it became less safe, but I was lucky and sort of made it home safely without getting sick. But it was such a wonderful trip. It was so wonderful to be back, and it was a terrific trip. I loved it. And it makes me, you talked about Norton Island, but it makes me wonder, how did you do your research on the Irish aspects of this novel? The folklore, I thought, was just the way you wove folklore through. And I don't want to give too much away, but there are these sort of wonderful threads through the plot, and there are some some texts that kind of some historical texts that make their way into the narrative. How did you do that research, and where did that come from?
Well, fortunately, that research I could do at home with a lot of books and with Google and with the internet. And also I've always been fascinated with Irish folklore. I've used some of it in books before. So really, I felt lucky that I could do all of that from home, that the bit of travel that I had needed, the Norton Island travel, was something I had done before. But then researching and sort of living vicariously on the island in my mind was a great escape. And actually, I'm just going to for a second share the screen, if everyone will bear with me for a second, because I found these pictures. They're showing up of the Norton Island landing. Do we all see that?
Yep.
Do you see there? Okay. So this actually, the way I describe in the, do you see this? Is there a zoom window there in the way? Let me get rid of that. How's that?
We can see most of it.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a clear view of both pictures, Carol, a complete screen.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. I'm just moving things around a little bit. So the Norton Island, this is actually the sign when you pull up at this very remote dock in Jonesport, and you see Norton Island landing, pass at your own risk. And so that's actually what it looks like. And then this is what the island looks like with the, with these boulders. So here, I'll stop share for a second. And as I was writing the book, I had, when I was on Norton Island, I hope if anyone's, I'm hoping there are some of my Norton Island friends in the audience. And so I am outing myself as having stolen rocks. Oh, Melissa Larson says hi. Hello, Melissa Larson, whose wonderful book Shutter also said. So I brought home with me these, rocks that have these mottled colors, and those huge boulders are all these great colors. So I kind of had them as my talisman when I was writing to remember Norton Island. And I had the little map that I had drawn, and so it was great to sort of have that as a mental place to go to. But the research mostly I did was able to do in books and through the internet. How about you? You had a tremendous amount of research in this book, as well as the two previous Maggie D'arcy books, both of which are great.
Yeah, I mean, my research is it falls into sort of two categories like yours. There's the, your time on Norton Island, which gave you the smell of the air and the way the waves sound as they hit the rock, and very similar, my trips to Ireland, that's that sort of sensory detail and where things are and how they look, and that's what I'm looking for. And then talking to people when I'm in Ireland, getting stories and getting ideas for plot threads is a lot of what I do. But then when I get home, I end up doing a lot of what you've described. I don't know do you use Google Earth as much as I do to look at locations?
So much. Yeah. I mean, I haven't occasionally, but I didn't really need it for Norton Island's awfully small.
Right. Exactly. You don't have to go all the way around it to, yes.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful tool because you can sort of, if you're researching a location, or, even if you've been there and know it well, if you need to sort of follow up with a detail, you can, come right down on a road and follow along and look to the left, look to the right, see how things look. And so I did a lot of that. And then the other kind of research that I have to do for these books, because Maggie is a homicide detective, is the sort of police procedural work. How are the Irish police different from the American police, and how do criminal investigations proceed in Ireland? How is it different? How is it the same? Those kinds of things. So that's a lot of the research that I do.
I bet, and that was impressive. Since I've never written a police character, I thought, I could tell that felt very thorough and grounded, and felt like I understood. Oh, how would you, if you were a police person and wanted to go to a different country? How would that happen? So I thought that was all beautifully done, that and grounded us in this of how she would make that transition. And I hope we get to see that in the next
yes.
Are you working on the next Maggie D'arcy?
I've actually finished number 4. I've given it to my editor. There will be a lot more editing, but I've given something to my editor. So so she will be back. She will be back.
Yeah, good. I love it so much. Do you think we should see if there are questions for us?
I think that's a great idea.
I was just about to say the same. So everybody, if you have questions for Sarah or Carol, please put them in the chat and put them in the Q&A. I will come back up to moderate those.
I wanted to say I've seen a couple people saying hi on chat.
They have.
Thank you everybody for coming. It's great to see people popping in.
And Melissa has actually given us a question in the Q&A for Carol. Congratulations, Carol, on your pub day. I'm only a few chapters into the Disinvited Guest, but already your characters are so memorable. How do you meet your characters? She asked.
Oh, and I have to do a quick disclaimer, because Melissa was part of that writers retreat, and all of those people were lovely, lovely people, including the founder of Norton Island, Steve Dunn, who sadly has passed away. But I felt a little bad. Some of my characters aren't quite so nice on my island. And I felt bad that I was like, no, these aren't like these lovely people who I met on Norton Island. So how do I meet my characters? I guess some of the some of them are people or parts of people that I've met in real life. I tend to not ever really take a full person and put them in, but little characteristics. There was so much, what I was noting in the when I gathered these people together, I was thinking of, what kinds of people were coming to this island. Part of what I thought of is how they would be in conflict with each other. And so I kind of met them the way my readers meet them, as they arrived, and who would be, driving the fancy car, and have the fancy watch, and who would be in the main lobster man in the big truck, and how he might feel about being the guy who's setting things up. So I actually meet them a lot as I write. Although I do some planning, I really, they come to me as, other than the main character who I maybe have thought about a little bit more, I kind of, as they appear on the scene, I think like, well, who are they and what's their backstory? And then I sort of go back to, trying to figure that out. How about you, Sarah? Do you tend to plan out your characters in advance, or do some just sort of show up as you're writing?
I think I usually will have sort of my main characters, and because it's a series, it's easier for me because I have these characters who I can just kind of call in from off stage and say, okay, get back on stage there. But once I have them, and as I suspect for you, my books usually do start with setting, and so once I have the setting and I have a few characters, I start writing, and just as you say, the other characters, sometimes I'll sort of know that I need someone to work in the store. I need someone who works in the store. I need a next door neighbor. And I don't really learn much about them until I start writing about them. And I sort of see what they do, and I see what their purpose might be. And then of course, there's always the characters who you thought they would just be a small walk-on part, and you fall in love with them, and then they become a major part of the book. So I don't know, does that ever happen to you when you're writing?
Absolutely. And I was going to say, you've got some great neighbors in your book. People are living in those little cottages that, turn out to be a little different than what you thought. So yeah, it's why I always feel like in the first couple of chapters of a book, I write much slower, because I'll be like, she walks into a store. Well, who is this person serving her? And, what is their story and what are they like? And then again, they, I might just be trying to, have the poor woman buy a loaf of bread, but then, this person might then become, they might come back and they might be, do a little bit more.
Right. They might be the murderer.
They always might be. Nobody is pretty much nobody is immune.
Everyone is a suspect, right?
Yeah. Well, tell me if there are other questions.
There are actually from Kat Webb. She says at first, Carol, I just wanted to tell you I've been absolutely obsessed with your work since Lake of Dead Languages. I've read everything you've ever written and have to reread The Seduction of Water and Drowning Tree every year. I was curious if your writing process has changed at all over the years.
Ooh, good question.
Well, what I was thinking just the other day, what has changed. When I first started writing, my daughter was, it was 2000, it was like 20 years ago. So she would have been like 9 and 10. So one thing, I always stopped on Friday. I would write I would walk her to school. I would write when she was in school. I always plan to have, I write by hand. So I write a longhand draft. And I would always leave the longhand draft untyped on Friday. So on Monday, I would be starting by typing. And that was a way of sort of bridging the, the gap. But I would leave, for the weekend, I would just go like, okay, maybe I'd write some notes, but I wouldn't work over the weekends because I had a young child at home. And that has changed. Now I don't recognize weekends at all. She's not here. So those kind of, that's kind of may sound superficial, but I think it is, you adjust to your life and that routine, now, I always come up with like maybe a different method or a different routine in order to but I don't necessarily, usually what I do now is I type over the weekend and start afresh on Monday with a new chapter.
What about you, Sarah? What's your writing process?
I type. I'm a laptop from the very beginning kind of person. And it's interesting because I also have, my writing process has sort of changed shape as my children have got, when my children were born, and then as my children have gotten older. And I think I actually sort of took a break from writing mysteries when I had really little babies. And then as they started to get older, I had the same realization of like, okay, I can write for 5 hours today, right? And then I can write on Saturday morning because they're perfectly fine and they can pour themselves cereal. And it's kind of wonderful to find those pockets and to be able to, I think it's kind of, I just felt more space for creative thought and production as well. But my writing process is really, I'm a sort of rough draft, like I speed through a very rough draft to just kind of get the ideas and the sketches of the characters on the page. And then I love to revise. I'm a big reviser. I go back many times. And that has not changed. That's still my process. Yeah.
We have another question here from Catherine Burgos. Did you become interested in mystery as an adult, or have you always been intrigued as an early reader?
Oh,
why don't you start? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I was one of those kids who grew up reading Nancy Drew, and we had some very close family friends who were Welsh and would send me. You couldn't really get them in the States at that time. In the 70s, they would send me Enid Blyton's, and they would send,
Famous Five,
and right. So I got all of those, and so I think we had some old Bobbsey twins lying around, and I was just I ate it up. I loved it. And then I discovered Agatha Christie, and that was kind of. I mean, I was about to say that, and that's all she wrote, but that's actually
me too. I was thinking that same thing.
That's actually not true, because I when I was in college, I was an English major in college, and I studied literature in graduate school. And I definitely absorbed the sort of snobbery around genre fiction during those years. Yeah. And so, when I first started writing stories and novels, they were not mysteries. And it wasn't until, I think I was sort of in my early 20s, and I was struggling to finish a novel. I had all kinds I had like the first 5 chapters of many, many novels lying around, but I couldn't finish. And I finally said to myself, I love reading mysteries. Why don't I needed to bring a little bit of that passion to the writing. And that's really how I wrote my first mystery.
It's going back.
What about you, Carol?
I didn't grow up reading mysteries as much. I was not a Nancy Drew reader. I was I read horse books. I read, Meg Buys a Pony and Misty of Chincoteague and all of those. But my mother loved mysteries. My mother read all of Agatha Christie. She would complain because she'd read a book and she'd say, I've read this book before. They just changed the title, so she literally read all of Agatha Christie. So I always had that in the background. And I, of course, read some Agatha Christie as I grew older. But I too, I went to, I was a Latin major in college. And so, I didn't really think, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't think of writing mystery for some time. And I even, when I did my MFA, it was, that was in the late 80s and early 90s, when it was all like realism and minimalism, and yet that wasn't really my thing. So it took a while for me to, and I think when I first wrote Lake of Dead Languages, I didn't really necessarily think of it as a mystery. I knew there was a mystery at the heart of it. Yep. But I wasn't even sure, and it would be called a mystery. But as I've gone on, I've just found, that this is the structure and the type of book that, rich in atmosphere and complicated plot that I love.
Well, and I think you bring in so many different, your novels are literary novels, but you bring in, this book is a work of speculative fiction in many ways.
Right, yeah.
And you bring in some sort of supernatural and horror
I was gonna
elements
mention
in
that,
some of
yeah.
your books. A little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like horror is not the right word, but
A little bit, yeah.
spooky.
There is a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that how you kind of are bringing in lots of different things.
And I think the mystery world sort of is open to that, which I love. I love that. I love the mystery community as well. I love, I think it's a very supportive and friendly community.
Yep.
And, and that you can bring, there are these other elements that, the supernatural and the, then they can be humorous or they can be very serious, brooding, and they stress setting a lot too. I think setting is always really important.
That's what I love about contemporary crime fiction is I feel like our colleagues are writing books that pin a place better than I think any other kinds of fiction is doing right now. They're just, somebody like Attica Locke, who I just love, those East Texas settings are
amazing.
Feel them. They're just so alive. And I think so many of our colleagues are doing that.
And that's, I always often want to read, I'm like, I'm in the mood to read something set in Ireland. And, so I can go to a Sarah Stewart Taylor, so I love that. I can see Helen is looking at the time.
No, we actually have another question I was letting that play out from Nancy Johnson.
Nancy,
yes. So how do you navigate the emotions of your characters? First of all, she says, congratulations, Carol, on your pub day. How do you navigate the emotions of your characters? Do you find yourself caught up in their emotional lives, or do you manage to stay detached? Carol, why don't you kick this one off?
I'm not very good at detached. I tend to feel pretty much with them and Nancy is a professor and dean at the school at SUNY New Paltz, associate dean of liberal arts, and I I was seeing all my students and when the lockdown happened and all the emotions that they were having, and that really inspired me in part because I was thinking, what's going to happen in 10 years to these people? Yep. So I do really try to engage in the emotions of people around me are inspiration, and I do try to get into the mindset of those characters and and be with them, sit with them in a way, even if it's if it's anger, if it's jealousy, so it's kind of exhausting. Quite frankly. Do you find that, Sarah, that you feel what do you come out of a day of writing an emotional scene and feel kind of wrung out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the goal, right? Like when that happens, that's good. That's a sign that I'm on the right track. I definitely have the other days too, where I'm writing something incredibly dramatic and, I'm bored, and that's a sure sign that my reader's going to be bored. And so that's when I kind of go back and rethink the scene and try to inject some of that into it, because you're absolutely right. I think that's when good writing happens, is when you're feeling your character's emotions. And when
Sorry,
can I pose a sort of secondary question there? I mean, Sarah, you're writing with your series often about the same characters, so presumably you're going on this emotional journey with them. Carol, you're writing about characters that you're leaving at the end of every book. Could both of you speak a little bit to that? Sarah, why don't you start?
I mean, one of the things that I love about a series is that I don't have to say goodbye to my characters at the end of each book. I can have some longer character arcs in mind. And I just absolutely love that, I know in this book, she and her boyfriend are going to be sort of happy and things are going to be good. But I know that in, 3 books, there's some major trouble. I mean, this is all hypothetical. I'm not necessarily doing that. A hypothetical series. But, I can think about that, or I can think her daughter is feeling this way in this book, but something's going to happen. And so, I love that about a series. But I have to say, every once in a while, I have that desire to close the book and kind of let them live in the reader's imagination a little bit, because that's what happens. I mean, Carol's characters they're up, the book is done, but they're up here and things are happening to them in my imagination. And that's really fun too.
Yeah, that moment of
Carol, do you regret saying goodbye to your characters, or would you ever have there ever been characters in your novels that you considered?
Well, usually, what I will say, first of all, I'm envious. I always have wanted to write a series, and I have written some fantasy series, but I love the idea of having that longer character arc and being able to return to them. But usually somehow in the books that I have written, I have put those characters through so much by the end of it that I feel like they deserve to just rest and go have their lives. I can't, and that sort of is what has kept me from writing a series, is that it feels like I've done their origin story and they're done. they're not police officers. They're not people for whom other mysteries would happen. That said, I have an idea for a historical series, which I would like to write, and I would like to be able to do that. So I'm envious of the series. So the Juliet Dark series. Somebody who remembers that? That was my Demon Lover fantasy series. Thank you.
I remember that. I think we have time for one more question, and we have a question from Susan. For both of you, and in particular for you, Carol, historical buildings, old buildings of historical significance are featured very much as a device. How do they, could both of you speak to how they contribute to the suspense within a thriller, and how useful that device is when crafting something that is truly eerie, for want of a better word?
Yeah, so go, Carol. I want to hear what you have to say.
So, and yeah, I was thinking that description of your old building, that castle in Ireland, was so perfect. I feel there's this great quote, and I'm probably going to misquote it. Churchill, we shape our buildings, and then our buildings shape us. And when I first read that in a little epigraph in front of a book on the architecture of Vassar College, which is where I went to college, and I realized, I spent 4 years in a place with old buildings, and that really shaped me in a way that I loved old buildings before that, because I grew up reading Jane Eyre and Thornfield, and I love those Gothic books that have the castle on the hill with the one window lid. So I loved that Gothic element where Lily sees the person in the window. So I think they represent, first of all, they're just fun and alluring to think about. They represent some past, and often some dark past. So they bring that in. And also I just think they on the landscape, there's also something psychological about a house, like I'm thinking of like that Fall, the House of Usher, where like when you're in an old house like that, it sort of manifests all your sort of desires and dreams, and I just love that stuff.
Yeah, same. And I think for me, old houses and old buildings are, they contain all of these human lives, right? All the people have been born and have died and have been married and have broken up and have, within those walls. And the house that I live in now is actually the house that my husband grew up in, and it was built in 1791. And so, many other people lived in it before his family. And there are, all over our house are little touch, like a place where a child scrawled their name on our staircase, and places where somebody put a fist through a wall and it was repaired. Just all of these, all these human stories. And so I think as a writer, it's like being in old buildings, as you say, they absorb the atmosphere, and it's like being with characters. It's like you live with these people who have lived there before, and I just love that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, ladies, it is 8:04. I think it's time. Unless we have any more questions, last chances, everyone. No, I think that's it. Thank you both for a wonderful and enlightening discussion this evening. A reminder to you all that copies of The Disinvited Guests and The Drowning Sea are available at Oblong Books and online at oblongbooks.com. Before we close, I'd like to extend additional thanks to Kelly Cronin of HarperCollins for helping make this event happen. And I'd like to thank all of you for spending your evening with us. Thanks, Sarah. There's the books. They're wonderful. Please read them. They'll make your summer. They really will. Thank you, ladies. Congratulations, Carol, on publication. Congratulations, Sarah. It was a pleasure to host you both. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Oblong Books.
Thank
Bye.
you so
Good
much.
night.
Congrats, Carol. And thank you to all of you who came.
Thank you. Congrats, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Good night, everyone.